I signed one piece of paper to help my son chase a dream. That's all. It was supposed to be a signature, a small gesture of support, the kind a mother gives without thinking twice. I didn't know that 10 minutes at my kitchen table would cost me $40,000, my peace of mind, and nearly my sense of worth. I didn't know that the same boy I once held through fevers would sit across from me in court accusing me of fraud. And worst of all, I didn't realize how long I'd been mistaking manipulation for love. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. My name is Linda Monroe. I'm 64 years old and I've been a widow for just over 5 years. I live alone in Spokane, Washington, in the same modest house my husband Harold and I bought right after we got married. We raised our son Tyler here. He was our only child. After Harold passed, the house felt too quiet, but I did my best to fill the silence with gardening, crossword puzzles, and calls to old friends. Tyler moved to Seattle years ago, and though we talked now and then, he hadn't visited in 6 months. So when he called and said he and his wife Kendra wanted to stop by, I was surprised but happy. They arrived on a chilly Saturday morning. Tyler hugged me tightly, and I held onto him for a moment longer than I should have. Kendra gave me a soft smile and handed me a little box of lemon scones. We sat at the kitchen table, and for the first hour, it felt almost normal. We talked about the weather, her work, and the boys, their 2 little ones I hadn't seen since last Christmas. I remember thinking how much I missed being a part of their lives. Then Tyler leaned forward, his voice dropping just slightly. He said things hadn't been easy lately. The company he worked for was bought out, and he lost his job. They were thinking of starting over in Lake Tahoe. A fresh start. A quieter life. Better schools for the kids. He smiled and pulled out his phone to show me pictures of a house near the lake. It was lovely. White stone. Big windows. A porch that looked out over the water. I could almost hear the waves. He said the seller was only taking offers for the next few days, and they'd need to move quickly. He didn't ask me to buy the house or pay for it, just to help with the deposit $40 to secure the listing while they finished the loan paperwork. He said the deposit was temporary, refundable if anything fell through. They just needed someone to step in and hold the house. I felt the hesitation rise in my chest, but then he looked at me in that way only a child can look at their mother, even when they're grown. He said it would mean the world to him. That this was his chance to build something solid for his kids. That he wouldn't ask if he had another option. Kendra didn't say much, just reached out and gently squeezed my hand. I don't know if it was the way he looked at me or the quiet weight of the years since Harold passed. Maybe it was the guilt of all the holidays spent apart. Maybe I just wanted to feel needed again. I told him I would think about it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. I remembered Tyler as a boy building pillow forts and asking me if I thought he could be an astronaut. The next morning, we sat at the table again. He handed me the documents. Nothing complicated, he said. Just a basic deposit agreement. No strings. I read it, or tried to. But I trusted him. I signed the form, and he smiled like a man finally catching his breath. They left that afternoon. I watched their car pull away from the driveway. There was a little flutter of something in my chest. I told myself it was relief. I was glad I could help. That maybe finally we were starting to reconnect. I went inside, made myself a cup of tea, and folded the copy of the signed document into a drawer. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. A small gesture. A mother helping her son. Looking back, I wonder if that moment, me sitting at the table pen in hand, was when I stopped being just a mother and started becoming something else entirely. But that thought hadn't arrived yet. Not then. Back then, all I knew was that I was proud of him. And I was sure he wouldn't do anything to hurt me. It started with a phone call I wasn't expecting. A woman from a lending office reached out to me 2 days after Tyler left. She asked if I could confirm some information about my income and assets. I told her I wasn't applying for a loan. She paused, then asked if I was listed as a buyer on the Lake Tahoe property. My mouth went dry. I said I'd have to check and get back to her. I hung up and stared at the papers I had tucked into the kitchen drawer. I pulled them out, laid them across the table, and really read them for the first time. I wasn't just a temporary name to hold the house. I was listed as the primary buyer, not co-signer, not temporary holder, just me. And next to my name was the full deposit amount, $40,000. That night, sleep didn't come. I sat in bed with my reading glasses on, going over the fine print again and again. It was written in that careful legal language meant to make everything sound more secure than it really is. But I understood enough. If the loan didn't go through, and if I changed my mind, the seller could legally keep the deposit. That was real money. My money. That was nearly everything I had in savings. I called Tyler the next morning, trying to stay calm. I told him the bank had contacted me and I wanted to better understand what I had signed. He sounded tired, annoyed even. He said it was normal, just a formality. That I didn't need to worry. Everything was on track and closing would be done in 10 days. Then the money would come back to me. Easy. No risk. But something about his tone didn't sit right. The way he rushed through his words. How he kept saying I didn't need to look into it further. My stomach tightened. After we hung up, I found myself pacing the kitchen like I used to when Harold was in surgery. Waiting for answers, trying not to imagine the worst. I opened my laptop and did something I should have done much earlier. I searched public court records for Tyler's name. It didn't take long. There were cases old but still there. Small claims. Credit card judgments. One case from just 2 years ago where a debt collection agency sued him for over $20 zero. That case had ended with a settlement. The documents were clear. I sat back in my chair, hands cold against the ceramic coffee mug. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself maybe things had changed. Maybe those were rough patches. But if he had this history, why hadn't he told me? Why did he act like everything was clean and ready? I looked again at the documents. The way my name stood alone. The absence of his signature. The way the contract used words like binding and non-refundable. I had trusted him when I should have slowed down. I had assumed this was still about family. But the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't about trust. This was a financial transaction, and I was the only one holding the risk. I spent that afternoon calling my credit union and quietly asking about protections or reversals. The woman I spoke with was kind but firm. Once the deposit cleared and the contract was signed, it was binding. There was no reversing it without penalty. She even used that word again. Binding. Like a rope tightening around my chest. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, something I hadn't done in a while. I sat by the window and watched the light fade behind the pine trees. I thought about how easily love can cloud judgment. How we want so badly to believe our children would never put us in harm's way. I wasn't angry yet. Not really. I was just confused, hurt, and scared. I kept asking myself the same question: why didn't he tell me the whole story? Why let me sign knowing full well what might happen if things fell apart? The more I turned it over in my mind, the more I realized I might be in deeper than I had ever intended. I had signed for something I didn't truly understand. And the cost of that trust was beginning to feel very real. It was a Thursday afternoon when the call came. I was outside watering the hydrangeas when I heard the phone ring inside. I let it go to voicemail at first, then something tugged at me. I went in, wiped my hands on a towel, and listened. The voice was calm, almost cautious. She said her name was Jessica Lynn. She asked if I remembered her, then added that she used to date Tyler years ago. I did remember her. Sharp girl. Quiet. She used to come by on holidays. The last time I saw her was Thanksgiving, maybe 6 or 7 years back. I had liked her. I called her back, unsure of what she could want after all this time. She didn't waste any of it. She said she wasn't reaching out as an ex, but as an attorney. She had come across Tyler's name in connection with a property listing in Lake Tahoe. She had a colleague working on the financing end of that deal. She told me plainly that Tyler's mortgage application had already been denied. His credit was too low. His income unstable. The bank had flagged the whole file. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I just stared at the old kitchen clock, watching the second hand skip forward. She asked if I had co-signed anything. I told her I hadn't co-signed, just signed a deposit form. She sighed. Then she said, "Linda, I'm not trying to intrude, but I think you need to be careful. I think he's trying to get around the rejection by using your name." She paused again, like she wasn't sure how much to say. But then she told me something that shifted everything. Tyler had filed for personal bankruptcy 3 years ago. She had found out through a friend and confirmed it through public records. He had never mentioned it to me. Never once brought it up in our calls, not even when he was talking about fresh starts and second chances. I asked why she was telling me all this. Her voice softened. She said she didn't want to see me get hurt, that I had always been kind to her, that even though she and Tyler hadn't worked out, she still remembered how I used to make her tea and ask about her classes. She said no one deserved to be pulled into something they didn't fully understand, especially not by family. After the call, I sat at the table with the phone still in my hand. The house was quiet, except for the sound of the fridge humming. I couldn't stop replaying her words. Bankruptcy. Denied loan. Using your name. I felt something cold settle in my chest like air leaving a room. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that my son could look me in the eye, hold my hand, and still hide something so big. But the facts didn't care about how much I loved him. They just sat there plain and unchanging like cracks in glass. I looked down at the contract again. My name signed clearly at the bottom. No Tyler. No joint application. Just me. I realized that whatever I was hoping for, reconnection, trust, redemption, none of it could change the truth that had just arrived in my kitchen on a call from someone I hadn't heard from in years. And in that moment, I stopped asking myself if Tyler had told me everything. I started wondering what else he had left out. I sat at the dining table with the contract spread out in front of me like a confession. The lines blurred for a moment as my eyes stung, but I kept reading. Every clause felt heavier now that I knew what I was looking for. There it was, printed clearly just above my signature. Buyer Linda Monroe. No cosigner. No reference to Tyler or Kendra. Just my name. I had thought I was just holding the spot. I had thought this was a favor. But in the eyes of the law, I had bought a house. Or at least agreed to. I called a local attorney the next morning, someone recommended by a friend from church. His name was Richard. I brought the paperwork and explained what had happened. He listened without much expression, then turned the pages slowly and circled a few lines. When he looked up, he didn't soften the truth. He said I had signed a legally binding agreement to purchase real property. The $40 zero was a non-refundable earnest deposit, and if I backed out now, it could be lost completely. My mouth went dry. I asked if there was any way out. He said only if the seller breached terms or if fraud could be proven. Otherwise, pulling out meant forfeiting the deposit. My hands trembled as I reached for my purse, not from age, but from panic. This was more than a mistake. It was a trap, and I had set it for myself. After I left his office, I sat in my car for almost an hour. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there staring at the dashboard. I kept replaying that afternoon at the table, the moment I had signed, thinking I was helping my son get back on his feet. Now it felt like I had stepped off a ledge. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that Tyler had let me do it. He had known what this meant. And still, he handed me the pen. I asked Tyler to come by the house. I told him it was important, and for once he didn't argue. He showed up late in the afternoon alone, his car idling in the driveway, a few minutes longer than it should have. When he walked through the door, I could see something guarded in his face, like he already knew what was coming. We sat at the table, the same one where I had signed the papers. I told him gently that I had been reviewing everything, that I had spoken to a lawyer, that I now understood the contract wasn't just a placeholder. It was binding, and the $40 zero was at risk if the sale didn't go through. I said I wanted to cancel the deposit before it was too late. I said I just couldn't do this. He didn't say anything at first. Then his jaw tightened, and his voice rose faster than I expected. He said I was going back on my word, that I had agreed, that I had made a commitment. I tried to explain I hadn't understood the full legal implications, that I thought I was just helping hold the property. He cut me off. His words sharp, almost rehearsed. He said I had no right to back out, that I had already signed, that I was jeopardizing his family's future. I sat there stunned, not just by what he was saying, but how he was saying it, like I was a business partner who had breached a deal. Not his mother, not the person who had changed his diapers and stayed up through fevers and broken hearts. Just a name on a dotted line. When I asked him why he hadn't told me about the bankruptcy or the denied mortgage, he didn't deny it. He just looked away and said it wasn't relevant. The silence after that was unbearable. He didn't stay for coffee. He didn't say goodbye. He walked out the door like a stranger. I watched his car drive off and disappear down the street, and it felt like something final had just ended. I called him that evening. No answer. I sent a message. Nothing. Days passed. Still nothing. Then a thick envelope arrived in the mail. It was from a law firm. His name was listed as the client. Inside was a formal demand for damages. $50,000. It accused me of breach of contract and of causing financial harm through my withdrawal. It cited dates, clauses, and losses. I sat at the kitchen table again, holding the pages in my hands. Everything inside me felt like it was collapsing. I didn't cry right away. I just sat still, numb. I had known he was upset, but I never imagined he would go this far. To turn what we had, what I thought we still had, into a legal fight. To put it all on paper and ask for money like I was nothing more than a liability. It wasn't just about the deposit anymore. It was about something much deeper. I wasn't being sued by a stranger. I was being sued by my own son. And in that moment, the weight of it was so heavy I didn't know if I could stand up. The lawsuit came 2 weeks later. I had just finished folding laundry when I heard the knock at the door. A man in a navy jacket handed me an envelope and asked me to confirm my name. I nodded, confused, and he turned and walked away without a word. Inside was a thick stack of papers. The header read complaint for breach of contract, fraudulent, misrepresentation, and civil damages. Filed in county court. Plaintiff Tyler Monroe. I stood there holding the pages like they were made of ice. I sat down and read through it line by line, but the words barely sank in. He accused me of violating the terms of the deposit agreement, of misleading him by offering help and then pulling out, of causing financial harm and emotional distress. His attorney was demanding that I pay back the $40 zero, cover his legal fees, and compensate for what they described as reputational damage from the failed sale. Each line felt like a stone dropped into my chest. I didn't deny that I had signed the contract. I didn't even argue that backing out wasn't messy. But to see myself described in legal language as if I were a con artist or a bad actor was something else entirely. The tone of it was so cold, so precise. There was no mention of family, no acknowledgement of the relationship we once had. Just sections, subsections, and dollar amounts. I called Richard, the attorney I had met with before, and he asked me to bring the complaint in. He flipped through the pages quickly and sighed. He said it was aggressive, but not without teeth. He told me that technically Tyler could pursue this case, that proving fraud would be difficult but not impossible if he framed my actions as intentionally misleading. I asked him if my son could really do this. He just looked at me and said that anyone can sue anyone for anything. The question is whether it sticks. I drove home that day and didn't turn on the radio. I didn't cry in the car or even blink much. My mind kept returning to the same thought. This was what Tyler wanted. He didn't just want the money back. He wanted me held responsible. Officially. Publicly. He wanted a judgment that proved I had done something wrong, that I had failed him. I sat in my driveway for a long time watching the porch light flicker. The worst part wasn't the legal threat. It was the realization that I had become something to be handled, something to be punished. Not a mother, not anymore. Just a defendant. I hired Richard officially the day after I was served. I didn't want to drag things out or escalate it, but I wasn't going to just fold and take the blame for everything. I told him I would take responsibility for signing something I didn't fully understand. But I would not accept being painted as deceptive. I didn't lie. I didn't set a trap. I was just a mother who wanted to help her son. We started going through every message, every call log, every email Tyler had sent me since that first visit. It didn't take long to find the tone I had missed the first time around. There were phrases like, "Don't worry, this is just a placeholder, and trust me, it's no big deal." He said it would only be temporary, that my name wouldn't stay on the papers, that everything was handled. He left out everything that mattered. The loan rejections, the bankruptcy, the lawsuits. All the risk was hidden behind reassurances and smiles. Richard said that mattered. That omission, especially when paired with emotional leverage, could be powerful in a civil case. He said we couldn't make the lawsuit disappear, but we could show that Tyler had used trust like a weapon. That this wasn't a case of fraud on my part. It was manipulation on his. I reached out to Sandra, my neighbor and closest friend since Harold passed. She had been there that weekend, saw Tyler come and go. She remembered how excited I was to help, how nervous I became afterward. She offered to write a statement. So did Jessica. She said she was willing to sign a sworn affidavit outlining what she knew about Tyler's financial past and how he tended to keep people in the dark when it suited him. There was a quiet strength in those women standing beside me. I didn't feel alone anymore. I wasn't just a naive widow who signed the wrong paper. I was someone trying to make things right. I could feel the shift happening inside me. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with fury. It came like the first deep breath after holding too much in for too long. I still hated that it had come to this, that I had to build a defense against my own son. But every time I opened that file and saw how he had described me in the complaint, a little more of the guilt fell away. He hadn't just dragged me into court. He had rewritten me. And I wasn't going to let that version of me stand unchallenged. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the truth, about putting the pieces of myself back where they belonged. Not in his narrative, but in mine. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Quiet with dull beige walls and chairs that creaked when you sat too quickly. I wore a navy dress Harold had always liked. I don't know why, but I wanted to feel like myself, like someone who belonged to something better than this moment. When I took the stand, I told the truth. I said I had signed the deposit form because I believed in my son, because I wanted to help him. I admitted I hadn't read every word carefully. I should have. That part was on me. But I also told them about the calls, the pressure, the reassurances that everything was temporary, risk-free, and simple. I said I trusted him because he was my child. And he knew that. Tyler's lawyer tried to paint me as careless, said I had caused the harm by pulling out too late. But Richard pushed back hard. He presented every text, every omission, every phrase Tyler used to nudge me forward without clarity. Jessica's affidavit and Sandra's testimony were entered into the record. The judge read them both slowly, his expression unreadable. When the ruling came, I held my breath. The judge said the contract was valid, that I did bear responsibility for signing it. He ordered me to pay $10,000 toward the losses. But he also dismissed the claims of fraud. He said there was no evidence of deceit on my part, no intent to harm. The court would not grant Tyler the rest of what he asked for. It wasn't a victory in the cleanest sense. I still lost money. I still carried regret. But as I walked out of that courthouse, something inside me felt light again. Not triumphant. Just clear. I had told the truth. I had stood up for myself. And I hadn't let shame keep me silent. Word spread quickly. Local papers picked up the story. Neighbors whispered. Not about me, but about him. About how far a man would go for money. About how easily a mother's love could be twisted into liability. I didn't feel proud exactly, but I felt whole. I had been through something that cracked me wide open. And I had survived it with grace. After the ruling, I gave myself one quiet day. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the pine branches sway. It felt like the air itself had loosened. No courtroom. No papers. Just the sound of wind and birds and the slow return of my own thoughts. I made a list that afternoon. Nothing dramatic. Just names and accounts. I called my estate planner and asked to schedule a meeting. When we sat down, I told her plainly. I wanted to remove Tyler from my will. There was no anger in it. Just clarity. The kind that comes when you finally see something for what it is. Instead, I created a scholarship fund in Harold's name. It would support women over 50 going back to school. I remembered how lost I felt after Harold passed, how the world suddenly stopped seeing me as capable. If I could help even one woman feel like her future wasn't behind her, that was worth something. Around the same time, I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic downtown. They helped seniors navigate contracts, guardianships, and the quiet forms of financial abuse that often happen behind closed doors. I sat in on consultations. I passed out pamphlets. I listened to stories that sounded eerily close to mine. Mothers, aunts, grandfathers, people who gave too much and were left with too little. It didn't make me feel heroic. It just made me feel useful again. Like I still had something to give, not to Tyler, but to others who might not see the danger coming until it's too late. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name and my street on the envelope. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. It was Tyler. 3 pages. Careful sentences. He apologized. He said he had panicked, that he had felt desperate, that he had convinced himself I wouldn't really lose anything. He said he had been wrong about the contract, about me. I read it once. Then I read it again, not looking for excuses, but just to hear what he had to say without all the noise. I didn't feel relief or forgiveness. I felt still, like something had stopped spinning inside me. I didn't write him back. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't know if I ever would be, but I kept the letter, folded it into the back of a drawer, not as a keepsake, not as a wound, but as a reminder that love, even the deepest kind, doesn't mean saying yes to everything. It doesn't mean silence. It doesn't mean surrender. I didn't stop loving my son, but I stopped letting that love excuse what he did. And in that choice, I found something stronger than forgiveness. I found peace. It was late summer when I finally let myself slow down. I sat on the porch with my feet tucked beneath me and a worn blanket across my lap, even though the evening was still warm. The sky stretched out in soft pink layers, the kind of light Harold always loved. He used to say that dusk was when the day finally told the truth. I never quite understood that until recently. The hydrangeas were in bloom again, full and heavy around the edges of the yard. I had trimmed them just last week, careful not to take too much. They reminded me of time, of how it can grow wild if you don't keep it in check, of how beauty and boundaries need each other more than we think. I looked out over the neighborhood, the same street I had lived on for more than 30 years. It didn't feel smaller or lonelier, just quieter. I had started noticing different things lately. The way the wind caught the leaves before they fell, the sound of my neighbor's wind chimes, the stillness between the birdsong. I thought of Harold more these days, but not with sorrow. I thought of his steady hands and quiet sense of right and wrong. I wondered what he would have done if he'd been here when Tyler brought the papers. I wondered if I would have been braver sooner. I hadn't been alone, but I wasn't angry with myself. Not anymore. I had made a decision out of love. I hadn't looked closely enough. I hadn't asked the right questions. That was my fault. But it didn't make me weak. It made me human. The truth is, we all want to believe in the people we love. We want to give them the benefit of the doubt. We want to think our love can cover the cracks. But love isn't meant to cover. It's meant to see clearly. To support without sacrificing yourself in the process. What happened with Tyler left a scar, not just because of the lawsuit or the money, but because I saw in full light how little he saw me. Not as a mother, not as a person with limits and rights, but as a resource, something to be tapped when convenient. That broke something in me, and in the breaking something new began. I had to learn how to protect myself not just legally, but emotionally. I had to learn that kindness doesn't mean letting someone walk over you. That forgiveness is not the same thing as permission. That setting a boundary isn't betrayal. It's survival. And I'm not the only one. I've spoken to dozens of women at the clinic, and I hear echoes of my own story in theirs. Women who raised children, held families together, gave all they had, and were left wondering if any of it mattered when it came time to say no. I tell them the same thing I had to tell myself. You're not wrong for wanting to help, but you are allowed to stop helping when it starts to hurt. Sometimes I miss Tyler. I miss the version of him who used to dance in the living room with socks on. I miss the quiet moments when I thought we understood each other. But I don't miss the silence that came after the confrontation. I don't miss being used. I don't miss the hollow feeling of wondering if I mattered once the money was gone. Healing, I've learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. It's about seeing yourself in the full story and realizing you're not just the part that got hurt. You're also the part that got back up, the part that learned, the part that chose to walk forward even when the road was cracked. So I sit here now with my tea gone cold and the sky turning dark. I don't need to rewrite the past. I just need to honor what it taught me. I am not perfect. I've made mistakes. But I am worth protecting. My love has limits, and that doesn't make it less. It makes it real. Sometimes we break our own hearts trying to do right by others. But the hardest right is saying enough.